Hi, this is Michelle with the Garrett Public Library, and I'm going to be bringing you your Railroader reading today. I'm going to read a piece from the June 2022 Reader's Digest. It's called Advice to the Young, and it is by Margaret Atwood. There's a little bit of a preface at the beginning. One of the world's most celebrated writers has much to share, though she sometimes wonders whether she should just keep her thoughts to herself. What advice would I give the young? I have trouble answering this question, and here is why. Just before Christmas, I was in a cheese store purchasing some cheese when a very young man of, say, between 40 and 50 entered. He was manifested and just bewildered. His wife had sent him out to get something called meringue sugar, with strict instructions to buy no other kind, and he didn't know what the stuff was and couldn't find it. And nobody in any of the shops he'd so far wandered into had any idea either. He didn't say this to me. He said it to the cheese shop person. She too appeared to be without a clue as to the meringue sugar mystery. None of this was any concern of mine. I should have, simply pursued my own personal goal of cheese acquisition. I found myself saying, "Don't buy icing sugar, that isn't what your wife wants. What she probably wants is something like fruit sugar or berry sugar, which is sometimes called powdered sugar, but it isn't really powdered. It's a finer grind than ordinary white sugar, though you'll have a hard time finding it at this time of year. But really, ordinary white sugar works just fine for meringues as long as you beat it in very slowly. I use it all the time myself, and it helps if you add just a tiny bit of cream of tartar and maybe a half teaspoon of white vinegar and..." At this point, my daughter, who'd succeeded in identifying the required cheese, got me in a hammerlock and dragged me over to the cash register where a line was building. "The white vinegar, not the brown," I called in closing, but I was already appalled at myself. Why had I spewed out all this unasked for advice to a complete stranger, albeit a helpless and confused one? It's an age thing. There's a hormone in the brain that kicks in when you see a younger person in a state of shell shock over meringue sugar, or how to get the lids off jars, or the beet stains out of tablecloths, or the right way of dumping the bad boyfriend who should be disposed of immediately, because as anyone with half a wit can see, the man is a psychopath, or which candidate is the best bet in the local election, or any number of other things on which you appear to yourself to have an overflowing fund of useful knowledge that may vanish from the planet unless you dish it out right and left on the spot to those in need. This hormone automatically takes over, like the hormone in a mother robin that forces her to cram worms and grubs down the gaping maws of plaintively cheeping nestlings, and reams of helpful hints unscroll out of your mouth like a runaway toilet paper roll falling down the stairs. You have no way of stopping this process. It just happens. It's been happening for centuries, no, for millennia. Ever since we developed what is loosely called human culture, the young have been on the receiving end of instruction from their elders, whether they liked it or not. Where are the best roots and berries? How do you make an arrowhead? What fish are plentiful? Where and when? Which mushrooms are poisonous? The instruction must have taken pleasant forms. "Great arrowhead. Now try it this way. You idiot, that's no way to skin a mastodon. Do it like this." Since we've still got the same hardware as Cro-Magnon man, or so we're told, it's merely the details that have changed, but not the process. Hands up everyone who's ever taped laundry instructions to the washer, dryer for the benefit of their teenage kids. There are mountains of self-help books testifying to the fact that the young, and not only the young, are fond of securing advice on every possible subject, from how to get rid of pimples to the suave way of maneuvering some youth with commitment issues into marriage, to the management of colic in infants, to the making of the perfect waffle, to the negotiation of an improved salary, to the purchase of a rewarding retirement property, to the planning of a really knockout funeral. The cookbook is one of the earliest forms of self-help book. Mrs. Isabella Beeton's enormous 19th century tome, The Book of Household Management, expands the tradition and includes not only recipes, but advice on everything from how to tell a real fainting fit from a sham one, to the proper color choices for blondes and brunettes, to which topics of conversation are safe for afternoon visits. Stay away from religious controversy. The weather is always acceptable. Martha Stewart, Ann Landers, and Miss Manners are Mrs. Beaton's great-granddaughters, as is Mrs. Rombauer Becker of Joy of Cooking fame, and every home handyman, interior decorator, and sex expert you've ever watched on television. Look at the shows and read the books and authors quickly, in sequence, and you'll feel the need of some cotton wool to stuff in your ears as a defense against the endless stream of what would sound like relentless finger-waving, hectoring, and nagging if you hadn't chosen to let these folks in the door yourself. With how-to books and self-help shows, you can absorb the advice if and when you want it, but friends or acquaintances or relatives, especially mothers, cannot be so easily opened and then closed and put back on the shelf. Over the centuries, novels and plays have given us a stock of characters. The older female or male, both versions exist, who's a voluble, interfering busybody, deluging the young folk with unasked-for tips on how to conduct their lives, coupled with sharp-tongued criticisms when the advice is not heeded. Mrs. Rachel Lynde in Anne of Green Gables is a case in point. Sometimes this type of person will have a good heart, Mrs. Lynde does, although just as often he or she will be a sinister control freak like the Queen of the Night in Mozart's The Magic Flute. But good or bad, the meddlesome busybody is seldom entirely sympathetic. Why? Because we like other people, well-meaning or not, to mind their own business, not ours. Even helpful advice can be indistinguishable from bossiness when you're on the receiving end. My own mother was of the non-interference school unless it was a matter of life and death. If we children were doing something truly dangerous and she knew about it, she would stop us. Otherwise, she let us learn by experience. Less work for her, come to think about it, though there was, of course, the work of self-restraint. She later said that she had to leave the kitchen when I was making my first pie crust. The sight was so painful to her. I've come to appreciate these silences of my mother's, though she could always produce a condensed pill of sensible advice when asked for it. All the more puzzling, then, that I have taken to blurting out instructions to strangers in cheese stores. Perhaps I take after my father, who was relentlessly informative, though he always tempered the force of his utterances by beginning, "As I'm sure you know." I went to high school at a time when students were required to learn things by heart. This work informed part of the exam. You were expected not only to recite the set pieces aloud, but also to regurgitate them onto the page with marks off for faults in spelling. One standard item was the speech made in Hamlet by the old court counselor Polonius to his son Laertes, who is departing for a trip to France. Here's the speech in case you may have forgotten it, as I found I had when I tried for Total Recall. "Yet here, Laertes, aboard for shame. The wind sits in the shoulder of your sail, and you are stayed for. There, my blessing with thee. And these few precepts in thy memory. Look, thou character, give thy thoughts no tongue, nor any unproportioned thought to act. Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. These friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple them unto thy soul with hoops of steel. But do not dull thy palm with entertainment. Of each new-hatched, unfledged comrade, beware. Of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Take each man's censure, but reserve thy judgment. Costly thy habit, as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich nor gaudy, for the apparel oft proclaims the man. And they in France of the best rank and station are most select and generous, chief in that. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend. And borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true. And it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee." The method is aggressive. Polonius scolds Laertes because he isn't on the ship yet, then holds him back with a long list of do's and don'ts. But it's all very good advice. A rational person can't disagree with any of it. Yet in every performance of Hamlet I've ever seen, Polonius is played as a comical but tedious old pedant, and Laertes listens to him with barely concealed impatience, although he himself has just dished out a heaping plateful of his own advice to his younger sister Ophelia. Looked at objectively, Polonius can't really have been the boring idiot we're usually shown. He's chief advisor to Claudius, who's a villain but no fool. Claudius wouldn't have kept Polonius around if the latter had been several bricks short of a load. Why then is the scene always played this way? One reason is that it would be boring if done straight, because advice you haven't asked for is always boring. And it's especially boring if the person giving the advice is old and you yourself are young. It's like the cartoon with the caption, "What we say to cats," what they hear. And over the head of the cat is a voice balloon with nothing in it. Our advice to the cat may be perfectly good. Don't mess with that big tomcat down the street, but the cat isn't receptive. It will follow its own counsel because that's what cats do. And that's what young people do as well, unless there's something specific they want you to tell them. Which is my way of ducking the question. What advice would I give the young? None, unless they asked for it. Or that's what would happen in an ideal world. In this world I actually inhabit, I break this virtuous rule daily. Since at the slightest excuse I find myself blathering on about all kinds of things due to the mother robin hormone I've already mentioned. Thus, as I'm sure you know, the most eco-friendly toilet is the Coroma. You can state your position and stick to your guns without being rude. Awnings cut down on summer heat through your windows by 70% or more. If you want to be a novelist, do back exercises daily. You'll need them later. Don't phone him, let him phone you. Think globally, act locally. After having a baby, you lose your brain and some of your hair, but they both grow back. A stitch in time saves 9. There's a kind of crampon you can strap onto your boots, handy on icy sidewalks. Don't stick a fork into a wall socket. If you don't clean the lint trap on the dryer, it may burst into flames. If the hair on your arm stands up in a thunderstorm, jump. Don't step into a canoe when it's pulled up on the beach. Never let anyone pour you a drink in a bar. Sometimes the only way out is through. That's a good one. In the northern forest, hang your food from a tree some distance from your sleeping area and don't wear perfume. This above all, to thine own self be true. Eyebrow tweezers are handy for getting big wads of glop out of bathroom sink drains. Every household should contain a wind-up flashlight. And don't forget about the little touch of vinegar for the meringues. That's the white vinegar, not the brown. However, here's the best piece of advice of all. Sometimes young people don't want advice from their elders. They don't wish you to turn into Polonia, not as such. They can do without the main body of the speech, the long checklist of instructions. But they welcome the part at the end, which is a kind of benediction. Farewell, my blessing season, this in thee. They want you to see them off on their voyage, which is, after all, a voyage they have to make on their own. Maybe it will be a dangerous voyage. Maybe you'd be able to handle the danger better than they will. But you can't do it for them. You've got to stay behind, waving encouragingly, anxiously, a little plaintively, farewell, farewell. But they do want the goodwill from you. They want the blessing. I hope you enjoyed that. Until next time.